what's going on? So let me give you a quick little acronym that you should pay attention to when you're organizing your training and going about a training session. So the acronym is called SLAM, and it stands for strengthen, lengthen, I hate to say it, but activation and mobilization. So let's walk through how you can, go use this acronym in your training session. All right. So I've noticed with a lot of athletes that when we apply this acronym, good things start to happen. All right. So especially in people who have low back pain or their knees are bugging them, something like that, usually it is, let's assume they have good movement patterns and adequate mobility, adequate flexibility. Generally, people just need to get stronger. That's about it, really. But we'll talk about why it can be a problem if all you do is strengthen. All right, so let's get to it. So this acronym, what you do is this. The reason I hate the word activation so much is it's just gotten thrown around so much in the fitness industry and sport performance world and all that stuff, as everybody's talking about activate this, activate that, and it implies that the body is dormant unless you're activating certain things. So what I mean by activation is doing something that helps with the mind-muscle connection. All right. So for example, some folks have a very difficult time, again, I hate to say it, but for lack of a better term, activating their glutes, because I can guarantee you that if you're front squatting 100 kilos, your glutes are more than active. You don't have to feel them the entire time. But, maybe it's a good idea to do something like a Cook hip lift, or maybe an RKC plank prior to training. Something very, very simple. It would just depend on your unique situation, but that would be what I mean as far as activation component. Or maybe a better use for you would be, let's do some power work of some kind, because everybody should be doing power work in some capacity. Doesn't really matter if it is jumps, medicine ball throws, Olympic lift variants, trap bar jump shrugs, whatever. You just some form of power work. Ideally, you're doing all of those actually, because you're going to surf the entirety of the curve, force velocity curve that way. So anyway, we do an activation drill, add in some power work, and then we get to the bulk, the strengthening component. These are going to be your heavy, and heavy is completely relative, but these are going to be your heavy working sets of both bilateral and unilateral movements. But for the vast majority of folks that I work with, we're going to get a big bang for our buck with strengthening bilaterally. Not to say you can't do it unilaterally, but we focus predominantly on bilateral heavy strength work, and we undulate quite a bit. Of reps are generally in the 3 to 10 range. That's not to say that singles and doubles are not of value. They certainly are, but the majority of the time we're in that 3 to 10 range. If you want further breakdown, is more likely than not we're in the 3 to 5 range. But that will be the strengthening component. Okay. Then for the lengthening component, what that is something I actually heard from Dave Tate on one of his podcasts. I can't remember, because the guy puts out so much great information. So if you're not paying attention to Dave Tate, check him out at Elite FTS or Under the Bar, Table Talk. The guy just puts out tons of great information. And what he talked about in one of his podcasts was how during his competitive career, he was a competitive power lifter. over his career, he focused on the game when we're talking about powerlifting, squat, bench, and deadlift, is how to move the most weight possible. That's it. So what will happen is powerlifters will try to maximize their leverages while using the shortest range of motion possible. Because if they can do anything to shorten up that range of motion, then they don't have to move the weight as far, and they put themselves in a better position to win. So anyway, when Dave Tate was talking about that, it's just made a hell of a lot of sense. And then he followed it up by saying this. He said, if he had understood and implemented, because I'm sure he understood, but if he had implemented more restorative type work with slowing things down and lengthening them through a complete range of motion, maybe on a different day, maybe immediately following his strengthening work, he was likely going to assume that he would have fewer injuries, right? Because if you go back and look at his career, he had some injuries that just come with the sport, but in his estimation, he felt like he probably would have not have had as many. But it made a lot of sense. You strengthen the major movement pattern, and then what I've been having the folks I work with do is they will immediately follow their heavy strength work with some sort of lengthening component as a restoration type tool. In some situations, we will focus that lengthening phase, if you will, on adding some lean body mass. So we may focus more on hypertrophy training, quite a bit higher volume. And then the last piece is the mobilization component. So what do we do when we're talking about mobilizing? Well, it's very simple with the populations that I train, which is predominantly, tactical, fire, police, things like that. So what we do is, after we go through a warm-up, after we do individualized activation drills, then we'll break out and do our main strength work, we'll lengthen, and then the mobilization work that they'll do is done in between each set of training that they'll do that day. So, for example, if I have some guys front squatting, they will front squat, and then in between each set, they'll pick some sort of mobilization drill that is directly tied into the front squat. So what I mean is this. When we're talking about the front squat and the restrictions that people have, oftentimes it's going to be one of three things. It's going to be an ankle restriction, which if you want to break that down further, you can say, look at the calf potentially. It is going to be a T-spine restriction or a lat restriction. Now, it can certainly break down more than that, but those are the big three that I see. So in between each set, rather than just stand there and wait for time to pass and go on to our next thing, we would do the first set, and then they would pick one of those three things, because most of the population has not worked on mobilizing those components at a sufficient level. So that's what I mean, is the mobilization will switch based on, we're going to train multiple sets. So if we're doing 5 sets of front squats, okay, there's 5 opportunities in between each set for a downtime of probably 2 to 4 minutes where they can work on mobility. So that's a quick summary of how I utilize SLAM and how you can begin to implement it into your own training. But in the meantime, if you have questions about anything, as always, comment, shoot me a DM, drop me an email, travis@dhpcoaching.net, and check out dynamichp.net for the latest updates. Have a good day.